Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. In the spirit of the trees, in the spirit of living nature, of which we are an integral part, with deep gratitude to all of our ancestors who have brought us to the present place. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising. This is session number 532. We have taken a break during the month of August, so we're just reconvening here on September 6th. And I just want to thank everybody for their prayers and support. The principal reason why we took our break is that for the last 16 years since I've been president of Ubiquity University, each year we make a pilgrimage to Chartres in France, where they have what they call the Queen of the Cathedrals. It's a site that for the last 3,000 to 4,000 years, as far back as anyone can trace, there's been an awareness that the hill in Chartres carries a powerful feminine energy. And that feminine energy has been revered, and pilgrims have been going there for thousands of years. And in the spirit of the feminine and an adoration of the feminine, they seek to become more fully human. So Chartres is the sanctum sanctorum of my spiritual life. Every year I've looked forward to making pilgrimage. It's the sanctum sanctorum of Ubiquity University, of Humanity Rising. Everything that we do is in the name of the Mother. It's in the name of the Black Madonna and all the fractals of the great goddess that have graced humanity since the dawn of time. It was a remarkably powerful return. We actually were there last in 2020, and then the pandemic made it impossible to go there physically. So we went there virtually in 2021 and 2020 and 2021. And now in 2022, we finally made it back. And the power of the reunion, there were 92 of us who gathered at the time of the Feast of the Assumption and the adoration of the Black Madonna that's processed through the town of Chartres. Many people expressed that this was the most powerfully transformational experience they'd ever had. It was, I think, for many of us, the most coherent pilgrimage we've yet to convene. And I just wanted to bring that energy and that gratitude. I want to thank Stan and Shannon for convening once a week the chat group that was supporting us. We had several of the pilgrims there, and actually when we asked how many were new and how many were there before, 80% of the people said that they were coming new, and most of them had come through Humanity Rising. So I just want to thank the Humanity Rising community and all of you who came and all of you who supported us. It was a very powerful session, and we'll be saying more about it over the coming days and weeks, because a very important initiative emanated out of our contemplation of how, after the pandemic, how do we regenerate love through the portal of apology and reconciliation and healing, all under the aegis of the planet Venus and the great goddess Aphrodite. And it's in fact because of Chartres that we're starting the way we are, with a 4-day program on regenerative health, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. But I also wanted to just signal that we are beginning with our fall programming an array of topics that I think will be of enormous interest and relevance, starting with regenerative health. But next week, we're going to go down to the Amazon and spend 5 days with the Pachamama Alliance, looking at the headwaters of the Amazon and what we can all do to heal the lungs of the earth. We'll be having programs on nonviolence. We have war in Ukraine, and God knows we need to immerse ourselves and remind ourselves, what does it mean to live nonviolently with one another? We're mindful of democracy and the challenges of democracy around the world in the face of rising authoritarianism. We'll be talking about how we can upgrade the global public health ecosystem. We'll be looking at the inner work of aging as more and more of the population in the United States, Europe, Japan, and around the world are aging. How do we refire the aging population as we grow older? We're going to look at how we animate from our interior through different health practices that are available to us as a whole other program. We're going to be looking and hearing from women around the world who are speaking from their wounds as they've endured the afflictions of patriarchy and come together. And we're going to be celebrating women in a very, very powerful way. We're heading into COP27, the Conference of Parties, each year for the last 26 years, now the 27th year, dealing with climate change. Last year was in Glasgow. This year it's going to be in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. And we're going to be bringing youth from 23 countries around the world to talk about climate action. So between now and December, when we'll take another short break for the holidays and the January launch of the next year, we have a very full program on Humanity Rising. So I just wanted to welcome all of you with, again, deep, deep gratitude. It is so good to be back with you. It's a very powerful impulse that we've been curating for the last 2.5 years, 532 sessions. One thing, just finally, I want to just, as you all know, with every session of Humanity Rising, we spend time aligning ourselves with our hearts. Nothing is more important than heart coherence. One of the things that we began to do in Chartres, which was one of the reasons why it was such a powerful experience for everyone. We continued our heart coherence, but we did it through a very specific breathing practice that I would like to share with you now. So as we begin our next phase of Humanity Rising, we're going to be amplifying our moment of coherence through breathing in a very specific way. Scientists have been researching why breathing, whether you do chanting or you do various Tumo or Wim Hof or different kinds of meditations. And they've discerned that the most powerful breathing practice that brings coherence not just to your heart, but to your entire physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual system is based on 5.5 second inhalation, a 5.5 second exhalation, which gives you 5.5 breaths per minute, in which you take in 5.5 liters of air. If you do this breathing, you not only bring coherence to your heart, but your heart in relationship to your mind, your brain. It balances your parasympathetic system, which is about relaxation and stress, with your sympathetic nervous system, which is your alert fight or flight mechanisms. And scientists, as they're studying the power of breath, are determining that this 5.5 coherence breathing is an optimal way to integrate all your body functions and from the inside out, optimize all the systems in your body, which is what we need in a world of escalating turbulence and escalating stress. Data shows, as we've been talking over the last 18 months, that in every country in the world, as the ecological, financial, political, geostrategic, public health systems are breaking down in the face of escalating chaos, people are getting more and more stressed. So when we do the coherence breathing, even for a minute, which we're going to do right now, you'll just feel how your whole system relaxes and feels more coherence. And if you keep your attention on your heart while you breathe, 5.5 seconds in a slow inhalation, and 5.5 seconds exhalation, you'll feel the power of coherence. And that's what's going to enable humanity to rise. So thank you, everyone. And we've prepared a special 1 minute. And you'll hear a bell. And the bell will sound. And you breathe in slowly till you hear the other bell. And then you'll exhale slowly till you hear the higher bell. And then inhale. And you'll also hear the overtones. Just let that go into your body and absorb it through your heart. Ready? Okay, Georg, give us the bells. Thank you, everyone. So wonderful to breathe coherently with all of you out there. Thank you so much. Again, it's wonderful to be back. I'd like to now introduce my good friend and colleague, Stephanie Mines. As you know, she's a PhD in neuroscience and epidemiology, and she has been convening a number of sessions on Humanity Rising on regenerative health. She was in Chartres with a colleague and was part of our group and did the breathing with us and walked the labyrinth with us and went down in the crypt with us. And it was a wonderful time. She even gave me a little healing right at the end, which I badly needed. And so when we were thinking about how would we start the fall program, I turned to Stephanie because, as you know, from the beginning of this year, we've said that given the escalating turbulence and the escalating stress and everything that's going on, the most important thing all of us can do is to fortify our inner capacity to be resilient. And Stephanie has prepared a 4-day program on burnout. All of us are burnt out by the 2.5 years of the pandemic and other things and the craziness of the world. And so we want to start with that as our first tonality, opening up the fall semester. And we also want to note at the beginning that Stephanie has prepared a course, a 4-week micro course that will be aired on Ubiquity University platform beginning in October. And that's something that we're going to start doing. We're going to have programming on Humanity Rising, linked to courses more and more, so that if you want a deeper dive, you can do that in a way that enriches everything that you want to be. So Stephanie, thank you so much. And I turn the program over to you.
Thank you, Jim. I am super enthused to be with everyone and to launch the fall iteration of Humanity Rising by addressing the global epidemic of burnout. And I want to say, if you really want a solution to burnout, ask a woman. And I have brought forward women for these coming days who can speak from their lived experience of addressing burnout as mothers, as professionals, as women of color, as Indigenous women. And I want to share with you the way to end burnout forever, which is indigenous to you, which is indigenous to everyone. Every day we will be practicing together very simple hands-on practices that speak directly from your innate resilience. We are going to be activating your innate resilience. And I am not speaking esoterically here. I am speaking as an embryologist. I am speaking as a neuroscientist. I am speaking as a woman, a mother, and a grandmother. I am speaking about a system that was imparted to me, for which I have enormous gratitude, by a woman named Mary Eno Burmeister, also a mother and grandmother, now my ancestor, that is woven intimately into the Tara approach, which forms the basis for the Ubiquity program that I will be offering, and other resources that are available to you if you want to deepen your experience of innate regenerative capacity. From the moment you were conceived, you were granted the resilience that is your birthright. This program, this approach to regenerative health is based on embryology. So this encompasses Eastern and Western medicines. And it is a secret whose time has come to be revealed. I am honored to deliver it to you. The bilaminar disc that forms your original step into being matter consists of both the regenerative and expressive components that we frequently associate with yin and yang. And that capacity to both deeply regenerate internally has always been with you, and to express that regeneration externally, that has always been with you. It has been colonized. It has been suppressed by patriarchy. It has been made obscure because it is your empowerment. And the time has come, as we are in the midst of this epidemic of stress and burnout, to reclaim the birthright of regeneration. I'm going to begin with just one practice. As I said, each day we will be receiving practices, and these practices are yours to share. Please attribute them to the source, the Tara approach that I developed, but they are yours. They are meant to be shared. This first practice is for your capacity, awakening, stimulating, igniting your capacity to come out of confusion. One of the impacts of stress, burnout, which has its origins in workplace exhaustion. But we are redefining burnout as the colonization of our innate resilience. That's truly what burnout is. It is the suppression of innate resilience, which we will be awakening in these 4 days. The first application brings you out of that confusion of colonization, and it is so simple. So you're going to place one hand over the opposite shoulder, either side, your choice. The other hand is going to come to what is known as the ischial tuberosity or the tuchus. I just came back from being with my family, so I may lapse into Yiddish. The tuchus, which is right under the sit bone, on the fleshy part under the sit bone, not on the bone, but on the fleshy part, just alongside the bone. So you're going to hold those two sites, and you'll get the map of the body from which these sites are derived, 11 and 25. 11 at the top of the shoulder means unburdening. 25 at the ischial tuberosity means quietly regenerating. So what I'd like to suggest, here's an illustration of a gentleman who has the wisdom to listen to women and do what they say. He is holding those sites. And I'm going to suggest that we use the coherent breathing as we tap into the way our entire fascial system responds to these sites. I want to make one note about the coherent breathing as someone who has a history of asthma and a lung structure anomaly, to feel free to adjust the 5.5 rhythm so that you are comfortable with that pace of inhalation and exhalation. Don't feel badly if it's difficult to do the 5.5, but allow yourself to breathe in that nicely paced rhythm that is the most comfortable for you. So let's take a moment to feel the way our system resonates with these positions, these sites. I call them sacred sites. Deepen the potential of them to awaken your resilience by softening your joints, perhaps closing your eyes. Your touch can be quite light. It does not have to be penetrating in any way. It's presence. It's the touch of presence. Let's breathe together. If you would like to switch to the other side, feel free to do so. One side will release the other, but it's an added bonus to treat both sides. This application brings you out of confusion. It literally reorganizes any energetic systems that may have become discombobulated, that are running backwards or perhaps into one another. Notice how you become self-regulated and organized as you hold these sites. Breathing again together. And you conceal the practice if you like. You conceal the practice with what is known as an inju, bringing the pads of all the fingers and the palms of the hands together at the heart center. Again, softening the joints, dropping into the earth with the soles of your feet, perhaps closing your eyes, resuming that coherent breathing. This is called palm inju. It activates one of the major channels that you'll be learning more about that ends burnout forever. Every day, as I mentioned, we will be learning new practices and deepening our experience of activating innate resilience. We will, by the end of these 4 days, have launched our capacity to truly meet the challenges, the unprecedented challenges of these times. That's my mission. That's my intention. I want to introduce my wonderful panelists for today, Dr. Nalini Yadav and Dr. Allison Davis. Nalini will speak to her lived experience as a woman of color, as an immigrant, as a professional in the healthcare world, of meeting burnout. I met Nalini actually before she was Dr. Nalini Yadav, when she was a graduate student in the throes of burnout, and she'll share that journey with us. Dr. Allison Davis, I am thrilled to be in a collaborative relationship with Allison in really doing what women are meant to do, which is assure the safety of our children and of the mothering function going forward into a world facing existential crisis. What has inspired me the most, I believe, to create the TAR approach, to create climate change and consciousness, is my commitment to the children now, my children, my grandchildren, and the children of the future. I can't live in a world on the cusp of extinction without doing something for all children. I feel connected to all children. So I'd like to introduce Nalini first to tell her story about burnout and to share with you how learning the TAR approach, learning these applications, doesn't mean you have to become a practitioner, doesn't mean you have to become a healthcare provider. You are welcome, invited, encouraged to deepen your experience of regeneration for your own self-care. Your life is precious. I just lost my brother. I'm just back from his memorial. And I want to say your life is precious, with even more underscoring than I normally do. Nalini.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Thank you all so much for joining us and for your time here today. Wanted to start off with just a little bit of background about who I am and where the foundations were set in order for my particular burnout that happened when I first met Stephanie, and then what has happened since then. So my parents come from very meager beginnings, from small villages in India where until recently there was no running water or electricity. My father did really well in school and was the oldest of his family. So he was supposed to take over, both my parents came from farming backgrounds. So he was supposed to take over the family farm. He did so well in school. He kept getting the top marks and kept advancing and advancing to the point where he asked my grandfather, is this okay? Am I allowed to continue my education instead of immediately taking over the family farm? And my grandfather said, absolutely, go as far as you can go. That brought him to the United States for a PhD program at the University of Illinois. His intention was to get his PhD and move back to India, a PhD in agriculture, so very appropriate for taking over the family farm and being able to help the family in all different ways. He came here, he faced a lot of different kind of challenges than anyone he's ever known has faced before. He married my mother, brought her here. The intention was that they were going to finish my dad's PhD and then they were going to move back to India. My mom became pregnant with my older brother, and they were now 3 people. And at the time, during the early 1970s, things changed a bit in the relationships between countries, and it was not that easy for my parents to be able to gain citizenship or to a path to citizenship even. So their intention was to go back to India. And then when my father finished his PhD, he couldn't get a job. So they had no money. They had 3 people to support now, a small human in there in the mix. And my father had no job. My mother had no education, didn't know the language. They faced so much themselves. And they made a decision that, okay, well, we have to stay here then. We don't have the means to go back to India. So we're going to stay here. So they went through quite a bit of turmoil of trying to figure out where that was going to be and how that was going to work. Eventually ended up in Canada because it was easier at the time to get a green card in Canada than to stay on a visa in the United States, since my father had finished school already. And during that time in Canada was when I was born. So shortly thereafter, my parents moved back to the United States and moved down to Georgia, in middle Georgia, so a smaller town. And this is where I grew up. So me, at this point, having just being an infant, I already have all of these wonderful as well as challenging backgrounds that have been kind of put together. My parents leaving their families to come to the United States, having some hardships here, having to move to Canada. So I have all of these different items in my mind, kind of bringing things together. And then being raised in a small town in middle Georgia in the South in the United States. It was a rather conservative Christian environment for this little brown Hindu Indian girl growing up. I was female, I was young, I was, again, of Indian descent, I was Hindu, and I had a weird name to most people. It was not easy. Do want to take a moment, and I will do this often during my story, to acknowledge that while, yes, I faced hardships, I also had a lot of privilege. And my parents, having gone through what they went through and having that support system of their culture and their religion, was a huge advantage that I had. I knew that no matter what I was facing out in the world, my family was there for me. So with my dad's education being his ticket, he felt that that is the way to succeed in life. So my parents in general already had this idea of education being the key to success. So they wanted us, me, my brother, to keep that tradition alive with an emphasis on being the best, not doing your best. And this wasn't a failure on their part as parents. As an adult now, I realize this was the best they knew how to do. They saw this as the formula for how to be someone, how to get somewhere, how to feel supported, how to be successful, how to feel just the calm that every human being wants, that satisfaction of, okay, I know I'm safe, I'm supported, I have everything I need. So that's what they instilled in us. They wanted the best for us, and that's how they saw that we should do it. So from an early age, from the issues of people not pronouncing my name correctly, to making fun of the color of my skin, to an elementary school teacher of mine actively trying to recruit my fellow classmates in order to try and get them to convert me from Hinduism to Christianity. I had all kinds of struggles and roadblocks in my way. But again, I still did have the privilege of knowing that I had support systems. So I went through life thinking that I knew I had to do better than everyone else around me. And I knew I had to do that in order to even be heard. At one point, I even, throughout my schooling, scrapped my desire to go to medical school. And I also had a failed attempt at a career in information technology when things crashed in the year 2000 with the dot-com bubble. And then the universe brought me a different opportunity as a mortgage broker. So I thrived in this as well. I felt like finally I had a calling. I had something I was really good at and that I could be successful at and can make my name for. It was also an industry that was very male dominated at the time still. And I knew I had to work harder than everybody else. And then in 2008, that industry also came crashing down. So while I had all the support system, I was still living in a man's world. I still had people that would call the office, and if I answered the phone, they would assume I was an administrative assistant or a secretary and ask me if they could speak to someone who could help them. People would they would talk to me on the phone when I was a mortgage broker, and they would have a great conversation. They would be ready to move forward. And the moment I would send them paperwork and they would see my name spelled, they wouldn't respond to me. And if they did, they'd call back and ask to speak to someone else. So when that finally went away and the mortgage industry crashed, I was left with no income, no foreseeable career, and no way to pay for my own mortgage at that point. Now, again, I want to acknowledge that while I may have had these challenges, I still had a lot of privilege. I still had my parents. I still had, some way to do something to take care of myself. I had no children. I had no one else to take care of but myself. So that privilege allowed me to do what was the next step in my life. So I joined a graduate school program to get back on my feet. And eventually, that was a master's program. Eventually, I decided to continue on to my PhD. And this is when the universe, I think this is a changing point for me, and something I was discussing yesterday with Stephanie, that as much as I've learned that effort is necessary and that I have to try and that I have to make a plan and follow through with the steps to that plan, the universe always has its own plan for me. And it will always take me exactly where I need to go. And I think this next story about my life and where it took me is really an example of how I've had to start listening to that by true necessity. So I was in graduate school. I was looking for a possible PhD program. I went to a conference where I was presenting my master's work. And there was a speaker there who was the dean of the College of Pharmacy at this university in Hawaii who was speaking. And I just thought he was really nice and really funny. And I thought his work was interesting. So I just decided to speak to him after he had finished his talk. And in our discussion, he was asking me, well, what are you doing? What are your plans? And I said, well, I'm finishing my master's program, looking for a PhD program. And he said, oh, we're actually starting a brand new PhD program at the University of Hawaii. Let me make some phone calls and let's talk again later. And when I spoke to him later that evening, he said, just apply. There's a spot waiting for you. I had no intention of going anywhere outside the state of Georgia, much less as far as Hawaii. And all of a sudden, I didn't even have to do anything, but there was a spot waiting for me. The universe was saying, this is where you need to go. And so I listened. I dropped all the plans I'd made and just went. And this is where my first interactions with the Tara approach came about. I was privileged enough to meet one of Stephanie's students, Tristan Elgin Street, who I became friends with, who became a brilliant, very talented massage therapist as well. So I started going to her for massage therapy as I had so much stress and tension because I felt like this is my last chance. I'm already a 35-year-old adult. I don't have a career. I don't have a job. I've never been married. I don't have children. this is it. This is my last chance. If I don't make something of my life right here, right now, I never will. Was that true? No. But that's how I felt. That was the burden that was on my shoulders of having to make something of this opportunity, no matter what. And that stress was compounded by the actual work of doing graduate school work, of doing a PhD. That work itself is so hard. And then you put all this pressure on top of yourself. And then there's the actual institutional pressure that has nothing to do with the actual work itself. These traditions of, it was hard for me to get my PhD, therefore it needs to be hard for you to get it so that you actually can put in the effort and put in the work that everyone else does to get one. And anyone that's been to grad school knows exactly what I'm talking about. In the academic institutions, the way they are today, there's still a very archaic way of actually helping the student get through what they need to get through. And it has nothing to do with the actual work itself. So this is the point I was at when Tristan came into my life. The universe sent Tristan into my life and sent Stephanie and the TAR approach into my life. I went to a massage appointment. Tristan looked at me for like 1 second and said, you know what, let me do some energy work on you. Is that okay? I said, please, I will take anything right now to feel better. And the moment she put her hands on me and started doing the Jinshin Tara approach work, everything just lifted. And I knew in that moment that this was my path forward. This was how I was going to make it through this. And so I took my first course with Tristan. It was a self-care course. And my original mentality and reasoning for doing this was simply just to help me get through what I was going through. I just needed a quick fix of sorts, which I think humans automatically look for those quick fixes, and they're not necessarily always the best decisions for us, but that's what we're always kind of craving. We want any discomfort to go away quickly. So after taking that self-care course, I realized that this was more than just a quick fix. This was something that I needed to make my lifestyle in order for my life to not go this direction again, to not feel this amount of burden again. And I want to emphasize another thing too here. It may be called self-care, but it is one of the most selfless things you can do for your community, for your family, for your friends, for the world. Because when you take care of yourself, you become a better person in every facet of your life. You can now be a better daughter. You can be a better human. You can be a better member of your community. You can be a better person in your state. You can be a better parent. You can be a better friend. You can be a better employee. You can do everything better when you take care of yourself. So by no means is this a self-centered act. And I want to make that very clear. Taking care of yourself is not only about you. It's how you help others and those around you. So I decided I wanted to learn more from Stephanie. So there was so much more as far as the unburdening of all of that burnout that I was feeling at that time. I became revitalized. I became far more receptive to everything that the universe was bringing my direction. And I also want to reiterate what Stephanie just said about learning this system isn't only for the purposes in which you may think. I never planned on becoming an actual teacher myself, or even a practitioner to practice on others, although that may change soon now. I just needed to feel the empowerment of being able to tap into that congenital knowledge that we all have. And it is so empowering. It got me through that PhD. I had to mitigate my feelings as I could, do nothing but wait. I felt like I had no control over my fate. But with the empowerment that I felt of learning the self-care of the Tara approach, I all of a sudden felt like I could do anything. I knew that I could complete this, and I knew that I was going to be able to move forward out this. And I knew that the next time I ever go through burnout again, I had the tools to be able to help myself and therefore be able to help everyone around me in that. And I do have to say, as much as that was helpful, it doesn't mean I'm immune to burnout. In fact, I am technically unemployed this week because I just left a job. I left last Friday because I was burned out. I never thought I was going to put myself in that situation again. But as we all know, there are circumstances that happen that will always put you into certain situations. And so I ended up where I thought I was taking a new job in order to further my career. It ended up, some things changed, and I was working 50 to 60 hours a week and not feeling accomplished at all. But because I had these tools, I could tap into what my body was telling me, what the universe was using my body to tell me, which it was telling me, go. Don't put yourself through this again. Go. You're not being the employee you want to be. You're not being the daughter, the sister, the human, the friend, the lover, anyone that you can be if you're burdening yourself like this. And so you're not helping anyone. So I'm happy to say that with those tools, I am able to once again make a quick decision to be able to get out of that situation and now come out of this burnout myself this week before I start my new job next week. So there have been so many things in my life that I think most of us as humans were usually driven by either desire or fear. And I think to kind of tip the scales a little bit to be driven more by desire than by fear is a huge step that I think that the Tara approach can really afford people. So there are certain points, there are certain flows within the Tara approach that you can learn that will not only tap into what the universe is telling you through your body, but will also allow you to let go. That process of, yes, I have more control over my fate because I'm empowered, but because I'm empowered, now I feel as if I can relinquish myself to what the universe is teaching me through my own body. And that's about where I'm at now. And I implore all of you to find any way that you can to take care of yourselves. Because as I mentioned again and again, it's not just about you.
Beautiful, Nalini. Thank you. And I really want to point out the contribution Nalini has made in beginning with her history. So burnout will attach to your history, to your epigenetic history. And that's what Nalini was sharing. She was sharing the epigenetic forces, which we now know. Science has demonstrated conclusively that epigenetic forces are actually more influential than genetic forces. So by pointing to those epigenetic origins and how burnout interfaced with that, this incredible effort that Nalini exerted to do the best that she could to fulfill the go as far as you can instruction of her lineage, only to drop more and more into the truth of what that means, is a model that I would like to propose for everyone, that you look at the way that your particular responses to the unprecedented challenges in every sphere of life is impacting you individually, and unraveling yourself into your true destiny, as Nalini spoke of. That is really the path that I recommend. And I love the emphasis on fearlessness. So within the map of the body that you'll be learning, Nalini, would you share that map? You'll be learning more and more about this map over these 4 days, and then in the subsequent programs that are available to you. There are these numbered sites, and we found 11, unburdening, and 25, quietly regenerating. And if you look at number 5, it's called fearlessness. So this is the 532nd program, as Jim said, of Humanity Rising. So that's 5-5. And we are working with the coherent breathing rhythm of 5.5. 5 is the number of fearlessness. So fearlessness is not denying fear. Fearlessness is taking the appropriate steps that mitigate and transcend fear, being precautionary. The precautionary principle is a fundamental principle in healthcare. So the Tara approach is about fearlessness, the number 5. And I'd like to now turn to Dr. Allison Davis to talk about fearlessness, burnout, and mothering.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here with y'all today. And Nalini, thank you for your share. And it really resonated in a number of ways of where I am. But last Thursday, I let go of something that also I felt would contribute to burnout, and I think monitoring our bodies and the messages, like you're saying, they're giving to us as gifts is super important, for this is a constant flow as we're in relation. But I wanted to talk a little bit about what came up for me, especially with, the epigenetic forces, this kind of idea of what we're always in relation to as well, and what we can kind of look to for guidance. But a little bit about my background: I am a PhD in women and gender studies, so I specialize in feminist and ecofeminist theory. And I look at the transition to motherhood, or matrescence, so it's matrescence like adolescence, as a period of rapid change, rapid development in the adult lifespan. And so I look specifically at mothers, and then also expansively of because what I think of as a mothering is an activity that centers the care for young, available to all people, human and more than human. And so looking at it from that view, mothering becomes this ethic, this practice, this value, and it can, I think, contribute a lot to this period of time that we're in and the challenges that we're facing. So that's kind of where I'm coming to the discussion a little bit from there. Did you want to say something, Stephanie? You popped back up. I can't hear you. You're on mute, I think.
Thank you. No, I just went off screen for a moment and I'm listening intently. Please continue. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the things that I study is how motherhood is constructed by the dominant society. So theorists have talked about that as a way that actually, authentic, real, mothering people are marginalized and minoritized. And even psychological research has shown how this concept of intensive mothering, which is this very high resource, both financial, time, emotional, psychological work that mothers are doing, this expectation of intensive mothering, which is where one person spends, exclusive time with one child. And it really is connected with attachment theory, which I'd like to talk about in a minute, but has a mental health effect on mothers and leads to burnout. And even if mothers are trying to, in their developmental process, develop their own style of who they are as a mother, this outside pressure from society. So we even think of motherhood as an institution different than mothering, which is the actions, and then mothers as a somebody who might take on that identity, but I think we can expand it for this discussion, just people who center care of young. So they may not consider themselves mothers. But that pressure from the outside shapes the experience of mothering to lead to burnout. So it leads to high self-policing. It leads to isolation within an authentic experience. It leads to tons of guilt. And it leads to what we see in terms of anxiety or depression, and ultimately burnout, which burnout is super dangerous for mothers. Mothers, especially after 1 year, new mothers have a high risk of suicidality or suicide ideation. And burnout is a huge contributor of that, because if you think of how your body, mind, spirit feels hitting an experience of burnout, and how that might be read within intensive mothering as failure. My kids are better off without me. I am even dangerous. If you think of perinatal anxiety and some of the things that are going through your mind that could happen to your kids. So it's a real risk factor for mothers. And part of the intensive mothering ideology, the institution I look at, is how that intersects with ecological values, and how it becomes kind of a prescriptive green motherhood of what you need to do to manage your child's risk, even from you, as you become overwhelmed and you're nearing burnout. And how that might be a distortion of some natural growth processes within the experience of caring for others that is actually shifting one's worldview in really healthy and positive and transformative and amazing ways. And so one thing we look at in matrescence, this developmental period of motherhood, is the change and the growth in all these domains. So the biological, neurobiological, social, psychological, familial, all this stuff. And I look at the ecological. But we also see with brain development, for instance, you have a tremendous change in mothers' matter, their gray matter. They think it's because of the, pruning process when you're undergoing these changes. But it happens in mothers who've given birth, adoptive mothers, nurses in the hospital, fathers, and I'd love to see research on grandparents, but it's shifting the brain. And so when I think about mommy brain, that has such a awful connotation in our culture of mothers losing some capacity. But I often think about it as it's maybe maladaptive to our culture, as someone is becoming more relational in their mind, body, spirit, and the way they want to live in the world. And so it's kind of the let me be maladaptive or maladjusted, because my growing worldview perspective is in opposition to our dominant culture. So that's part of what I'm bringing to this, is kind of how the social construction of motherhood, and green motherhood in particular, shapes experiences for mothers in this very important period of time to lean, to push people towards burnout and their experiences. And I read some really interesting research this past week that, these perspectives, which are shaped a lot by child psychology. So psychology has been very child-centered and seen mothers even in as a risk within that, their experiences of anxiety and depression and attachment, which we could look at as epigenetic forces. And so when we center the mother, it's a different picture. And one of the things I like to say is, because people kind of see, sometimes take offense to that, but when you center the mother in maternal psychology, you often empower the child to be a real agential force in from a relational perspective, where the child is also shaping the mother, shaping the environment. So it's not just a one-way linear approach to thinking about relational human development within that time period. So those are, I think, where I'll stop my comments today, and see what you have to say, Stephanie.
Thank you, Allison. Alice and I are just at the initial stages of collaborating on a book that we hope will help moms and families in terms of preparing children, interacting with children, engaging with children about the realities of our ecological crisis, and coming to that confrontation with the truths and the options available to us with dignity and clarity and respect for our children's intelligence. I want to emphasize the way in which Allison so beautifully pointed to some of the direct physiological expressions of burnout. And I want to say that when I talk about ending burnout forever, I am not being Pollyannish and saying we don't have to go through these experiences. I think I go through a mini burnout frequently because I am impacted by all the things that Jim mentioned at the beginning of this program, the threats to democracy, which are real, the extinction of species. If I didn't feel the grief of the truth that we are losing precious beings every day, I would not be who I am. I am not immune to feeling the realities of where we are in history. But as a result of the practices, which are the hands-on applications that I want to share with you, but beyond the hands-on applications, it's the sorting through of those epigenetic forces and how they interface with the way in which I experience burnout, which is a sense of incredible grief and loss that is the result of my epigenetic experiences, but which I reframe in an ongoing way through the aspects of the TAR approach that I'm here to share with you. So when Allison speaks to that horrific suicidal ideation that I know from the mothers who I have served happens, and how we can transmute that and respect it at the same time, and how we can interact with that sense of guilt that many women feel if they sense that they can't perform their motherly duties in ways that are, by the standards and this pressure that's put on them, acceptable. We have to be, I feel, realistic and honest about the existence of these really painful experiences in order to transcend burnout. So what I want to offer people here is the opportunity of buoyancy. So buoyancy doesn't mean that we don't drop down into that confrontation with this existential crisis that we are living in. I really don't want to deny that. I really want to be able to approach it with the fearlessness that includes preparation, precaution, and preparing our children and building the intelligence and original brilliance that is released through the practices I want to share as the solutions, the innovative solutions to climate catastrophe and to all of those threats that are in our faces every day. So I'd like to open to a conversation with Nalini, Allison, Jim, and engaging with the chat, which I have to confess, I really haven't been focusing on because I want so much to focus on Nalini and Allison and the delivery of the stunning revelatory messages that I want to share with you. And I want to mention also that Nalini will be with us every day. I'm very happy to say she is supporting me by handling the technology of the screen shares. Tomorrow, we will be watching a video that will show the multicultural nature of the Tara approach and how we can be resources for people of all cultures And we will also have with us tomorrow Dr. Spring Chung, an indigenous Chinese Taoist, who will speak even more specifically about this inherent resilience that is part of our embryological unfolding. So Jim, questions, comments? What's your experience of listening to women talk about burnout?
Well, I'm inspired, Nalini and Allison. Thank you so much for your stories and your comment. And Nalini, I was very struck by your point that, you know, when we do the inner work, we're actually empowering ourselves to do the outer work. That it's really two sides of the same coin. And so I think that's worth going into in a little bit more detail, because I think it's the essence of what Stephanie's seeking to bring into the Humanity Rising community, that the more we can develop regenerative health for ourselves, the more empowered we are to be of service in a world that is clearly careening from one, crisis to another. So I would love to have a deeper comment on that. And then Allison, I was also struck by your narrative and in particular your assertion. I'd love to have you go into more detail on what you actually mean by the fact that birthing and mothering is actually sculpted by patriarchy. You know, we often think of mothers having their little babies sort of as mothers have their little babies. And I think it's worth a deeper exploration on how the context of a patriarchal system constrains the way mothers can nurture their own young. So I thought those would be 2 points, maybe starting with you, Nalini, and then you, Allison, that we might be able usefully to go into.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Jim. That is, I think, one of the most essential points that I've learned, or maybe not learned, maybe realized in my journey with the Tara approach, is that I guess I'm the type of person that always feels like I need to be doing service. That in Hinduism we call it seva. Seva is to serve someone other than yourself. And I have always known that the thing that they actually teach nowadays in business school, that in order to get what you want, you have to help the other party get what they want, right? And that transcends more than just a transaction. I think that is in the world in general. To feel any kind of fulfillment yourself, you really do have to have that some extent of, altruism, of wanting the other to be successful, to be happy, to be fulfilled. And I think a lot of people shy away from self-care because they feel like it's selfish.
Yeah.
And I think, especially, Allison, what you're talking about with mothers, I've seen mothers growing up, my friends' mothers, who other people look at them like, oh my gosh, look at them. They're so selfless. They take care of their kids so well. And I'm like, no, that auntie is burnt out. That auntie is not giving her kids what she should be able to give them because she's not taking care of herself. And I think that's so important of a point, that in order to be able to help others, you have to take care of yourself. If your own glass is half full, how are you going to fill, someone else's stomach? You have to take care of yourself first and foremost. Just like in the airplane, before you put the oxygen mask on the baby, put it on yourself first. A great point, Jim.
Thank you. Thank you. Allison.
Yeah. So that's something I work a lot with mothers. So I do nature therapy for new mothers. And a big part of that is to become more relational. And I'm developing this idea in my work of mutual flourishing, because we have this idea of maternal flourishing. And people have these experiences on a bell curve, and some are, clinical and really, really struggling, but they also expand across the spectrum. And the idea that we can have stress and that actually creates a transformation, I think, would be on the flourishing side. But the idea of mutuality in our culture is really problematic because the way we think about reciprocity is transactional. And also thinking about how patriarchy has shaped motherhood, which is my favorite topic maybe. But it's really privatized it with the Industrial Revolution. And it's isolated mothers in ways that are really problematic and harmful. It's hidden their labor, it's devalued their labor, all to prop up an unsustainable neoliberal economy. And so it becomes this very personalist, political, kind of second wave feminist issue, which we have not worked through. And in a lot of ways, we are going backwards on with the pandemic and the ways that mothers were kicked out of places that they really enjoyed and were passionate about being, and that made them full people. But we also see mothering within this kind of patriarchal model as the creation of the perfect child. And with kind of the loss of perspective Nalini's talking about the relationality of all these things, possibly the divine, the loss of that in our culture has created a cause and effect, a linear type of thinking where most people that have been seeing a therapist for a while have heard, like, what'd your mother do? Let's trace this problem back to mom. So it gets into that attachment kind of what did she do to mess you up? And that is internalized always, I think, in some way, shape, or form, even if I don't believe in it. I'm a new mom with a 7-month, not a year old, 7-month-old again. And going through it with this perspective, I can see the insidious nature of how it shapes my experience. And I'm pretty militant about it. But so seeing mom as risk constantly is internalized by mom. And this idea of, self-care, relational care, and nature therapy is super important. But the problem is, thinking of it as, when do you have real lived experience of the mutuality of this interaction with nature, with other people, human and more than human? And that's kind of a skill I think our culture is really lost, and something that is, I think, possible to come back through the caretaking experience, because you see how powerful these new beings are. And I often think of my children as my constant teacher. They, despite me holding on to this teaching position tooth and nail, Thursday night I centered and I said, it's gone for me, right? Because it's not, it's draining me. It's leading me to that burnout wall where I can't be good for anyone, but I also, am not feeling great myself. So the issue of patriarchal motherhood makes this self-care the community care, right? Because I can't take care of myself without, like, in these very privatized, isolated spaces where I'm monitoring myself so much because I'm afraid my children are going to get taken away from me. I see a lot of young women who've had experiences themselves in the CPS, foster care system. And so all these, these militarized governmental systems are shaping motherhood experiences where they may not want to leave their home because they're afraid they're going to mess up. Right? You got to be the perfect mom or else. And so having more community care around, and tools, like Stephanie's talking about, to take care of us. So they're asking what's the actual definition of burnout? So I might pass that along to you. But this idea that if there are mothers here or people who know mothers, which is very highly likely, this care has to be communal, and it has to be brought not how do you need help, but I'm here to help, and these are the ways I'm going to help to create that space.
I really love your questions, Jim. And you're exactly right. The purpose of what I've created, both in the TAR approach and climate change and consciousness, is the value of our individual lives and being able to dive into the way that very personal history, that epigenetic history, that individuated history is being interwoven with the collective experience that we're all having at a time of transformational opportunity that actually requires that inner work. Without that inner work, I don't believe we will be able to develop the innovative, intelligent, and in many ways common sense responses to the crises that we all face. And in speaking of how motherhood has been colonized, I've been on this for a long time. I have invested enormously in educating about how patriarchal industrialization of medicine has stolen pregnancy, has stolen the birthing experience. And I have developed materials and been on a platform to regenerate the physiological awareness of the beauty of our embryogenesis and restoring that and honoring that. I'm so excited to share with everyone the knowledge that I have as an embryologist of how resilience is innate in the human nervous system. I know I keep saying that. It's because it's the truth that literally within the embryological process, the embryo herself fuels nurturing structures. The embryo develops the umbilical cord and the nurturing of our organic development even before the placenta is formed. And the embryo, you, through this feminine yin aspect of human development, you yourself develop your own placenta. It is through your hormonal secretions that the placenta that nourishes you evolves. And this is not esoteric energy medicine. This is embryology. This is how humans develop. And I feel sometimes strident in my insistence on what has been obfuscated, what has been erased from the experience of pregnancy. And this development is fueled by the feminine forces. There are masculine forces as well. The bilaminar disc is yin and yang together. It is both nurturing and active, both internal and external. But it is the nurturing forces that are the heart of resilience. It is the feminine that is the heart of the resilience. Embryogenesis is a model of permaculture. It's a model of regenerative agriculture. So the feminine as a living being, as an embryological unfolding, is in fact what we're looking for at this crucial time.
Stephanie, go into more detail in light of what you just said. Stan and Shannon had two related questions. Stan is, when does anxiety become burnout? And Shannon's question is, how would you actually define the state of burnout? What does that physiologically or emotionally entail?
I think the stellar aspect of burnout, and I have worked with burnout in many different contexts. Before I focused so much on climate crisis, I worked with agencies, particularly agencies that served survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. And I worked with the staff of those agencies because they were frequently in a state of burnout. And I think the stellar aspect of burnout is this sort of cynicism and this sort of loss of inspiration, this collapse, both physiologically and mentally, into the depressive aspects, the discouraging aspects of being of service to people who are suffering. So that vicarious re-traumatization is sort of the language that was developed around that. I disagree with that language, and I disagree with those definitions of burnout because I think they ignore the way in which individuals respond to those circumstances based on their unique histories. But nevertheless, those characteristics remain consistent. So there's this sort of a loss of motivation, a sense of hopelessness around circumstances that are incredibly discouraging, that are relentless. Women who, for instance, have been sexually and physically abused and yet return to the perpetrator. I grew up in that environment. I grew up in an environment in which my father was abusive and my mother always took him back. So I know the sadness that comes from that. And what I've learned through my own evolution, which is not only through my studies and my research, but through my personal process, is that it is possible to face those realities, not escape from them, not disassociate from them, but bounce back from them with this quality of buoyancy. I just experienced it. Going back into the family dynamic over the loss of my brother, I could feel, it was really palpable to me. I could feel how I was being sucked back in to what I grew up with, which was that it was my responsibility to take care of everybody. It was my job to negate what I love, what I consider to be the passions of my life, put that aside and just take care of everybody. And I could feel myself being drawn into that like a vortex. And I had to pry myself out of it. But prying myself out of it is not an abandonment of my family members. It's a way of establishing and differentiating who I am from those circumstances. That is the art of resilience. And that to me comes from enlivening the pathways that I was born with. And I know, again, from my lived experience, from my own repatterning of really significantly damaging early experience, including a very traumatic pregnancy and birth that I endured in my environment, that I can reestablish the innate purpose. I call it original brilliance or embryonic intelligence. That original purpose has been reconstituted within me. And that is what I want to share with everyone.
Brilliant. You know, we've all had the feeling of feeling mature adults, and then you walk through the front door of your home, of your parents. And it's like I've even seen, a cartoon I saw once, the man is about 6 foot tall, and as he approaches the front door, he gets smaller and smaller till he's reduced to becoming a little boy again. And you went through that, in your 70s, you were reduced to a teenage girl trying to please mama, and to extricate yourself in a mature way is really a high art form. It's really, really a high art form. I love what you said, Stephanie, about burnout being the rise of cynicism and the loss of inspiration. And that brings me back to your point, Nalini, that we look out at the world and we see it, we get depressed at what's happening in the world. But actually, if you think about it, it's just really, you're refracting out into the world your own interior state. And if you're not burnt out, you look at the world as a challenge as opposed to a cynical, hopeless endeavor. And so that relationship between the interior and the exterior is much more subjective than we think. And it's just worth reflecting, everyone, that if you're really pessimistic about world affairs, it may be true, but it may also be true that it's a mirror to your own state of burnout.
I think one of the key things that I've discovered is that I have a very unique contribution to make to the dilemma that we're in. And I had that unique contribution to make in my family. Nobody wanted to hear it. So this message, Jim, that I feel you've been reiterating through Humanity Rising, that it's really time to listen to the women. It's really time to make space to listen and follow through with what it is that they are suggesting. And for the first time, when I was with my family and I could feel this pull, this intense pull to be only in their service, to not be in my service, but to take the intelligence that I have that they somehow recognize. They recognize my competence and they want to take it from me. They want me to use it for them. And I'm happy to use it for them, but not exclusively. And finding the capacity, this is a key capacity of embryogenesis, the capacity of differentiation. So the embryo engages in two primary dynamics: consolidation, so consolidating the information. That is an incredible act, because in that bilaminar disc that is the embryo, everything is there. Every organ, every hair on your eyelash, every aspect, every bone, every muscle is in that bilaminar disc. So that's all compacted by the embryo and then differentiated and then sent to its proper place, its designated functional expression. That is the feminine and the masculine activity of the embryo. And so there I was with my family, condensing all of the information of each of them as individuals and then differentiating while remaining in their service. That was a breakthrough.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, we just have time for a final comment from each of you, just to summarize what message you would like to impart to our global community, starting with you, Allison, then Nalini, and then finally a word from Stephanie. Thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you for having us here. And I feel so hopeful when I hear Stephanie. You know, she's in mother, and not the mother that our culture is talking about in terms of suffering and sacrifice, but I find so much hope for people to bring that mothering ethic back to the collective in the way that she's talking about as this gift. So thank you for having me here and speaking to that.
Thank you, Allison. And I think there's your notion about the patriarchal constraints on mothering, I think that needs more public exposure. You know, and I would urge you, maybe you're already doing it with Stephanie, but there's a book there. There's a bestseller there. Because I think that's an aspect of patriarchy that hasn't been fully brought to the public domain. Normally, we think of mature women having difficulties with the glass ceiling and abuse and so forth and so on. But I would welcome maybe later on a whole session on Humanity Rising, just on mothering and patriarchy. And if you'd be willing to develop that, I would love to follow up, because I think that's a rich, rich vein to explore, if you're interested. Nalini.
First of all, yes, I would be very interested in that as well.
Yeah.
Just wanted to express
great subject. It's a great subject.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's so much to unpack there. I just want to express my gratitude for for Jim and for everyone else involved in Ubiquity University and Humanity Rising and this platform. And of course, to my mentor and teacher, Stephanie, and to Allison as well. It's quite an honor to share this stage with you, this virtual stage with you. I've learned so much in just our few minutes together. And I have one thing that I want the people here to be able to take away from this is, number one, I'll repeat it again. Self-care is not a selfish act. It really is for the good of all. And the other thing I wanted to say is that, it's all about perspective, right? So as Jim was saying, that when you're seeing things in a certain light, that it may actually be a reflection of what your own feelings are at the moment. So don't be afraid to try and change your perspective in some way, somehow, in order to change your perspective. Right.
Yeah, that's so profound, Nalini. I mean, the inner and the outer are one. And that's just the bottom line. And we're in a world of increasing outer chaos. And we have to compensate for that by a deepening of our interior resilience. And that's why we're doing the 5.5 breathing. It's an optimal way, just through the breath, of increasing your internal resilience and fortitude for your entire body system. So thank you for that. Thank you very much. Stephanie, final word?
I want to express appreciation to you, Jim, for your participation. My original vision of this summit was that you would be involved, so I'm really happy to see that manifesting. I want to share with everyone that in the coming days, I will be demonstrating and inviting you into practices that awaken original brilliance, awaken embryonic intelligence. And please, as Nalini suggested, be prepared to be surprised that there is lurking within you this embryonic directive that is your unique contribution to these times. And these practices, particularly when they're repeated, begin to evoke them. So this summit gives you the tip of the iceberg. The Ubiquity program will go much deeper, and intervening there is an opportunity with the Chara approach to deepen and prepare even more for the Ubiquity program. And I'm hoping that we will be expanding these offerings through Ubiquity University and a regenerative health master's program that Jim and I are dialoguing about, that it really is the fruition of a vision I've held here for almost a decade. So please join us tomorrow. We will see videos that I created with my colleagues, Peter Hurd, who you saw with the Inju, and Michelle Wilcox, advanced Tara approach practitioners and teachers for refugees from the war in Ukraine, but these apply to all people dealing with overwhelming panic and shock. And you will learn more practices and meet my beloved friend and colleague, Dr. Spring Chung, who will share the indigenous Chinese Taoist perspective on all that we are talking about. So thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Nalini. And Allison, this has been a brilliant start to our fall programming here at Humanity Rising. I just put in the chat the link to Stephanie's course from Burnout to Buoyancy that'll start in October. So you have that and can register for that for a deeper dive into what we're going to be all needing to do more and more as the world unfolds. And I'm deeply grateful. That'll do it for us for today, everyone. You're all invited to the after session chat group. You'll see the link that Stan has just put into the chat box if you want to join. And we'll see you then same time, same station tomorrow for the second session of Stephanie's 4-day program on regenerative health and dealing with burnout. Thank you, everyone. Bye for now.